Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sovereign Lovestream.
Hello, happy Sovereign Sunday. Thank you for joining us today. We are your hosts. I'm Vanessa Velez.
And I'm Danny Panzella.
And this week we are talking about
shame. Shame. We're also going to be talking a little bit about Mary Magdalene and her relationship, or what she has taught us about shame. This past week was the Feast of Mary Magdalene. Do you know why it's celebrated? Did they pick a certain day for that for a reason?
I'm not exactly sure why the date is. I know it's only been happening for a few years.
Mm-hmm. I think it was 2016 that the Pope decided to
bring Mary Magdalene kind of back into the light and I guess give her some of the
recognition that she hasn't had for the past few thousand years.
And we've been, as Danny and I have kind of been on this spiritual journey, we've come across some information about Mary Magdalene that was a little interesting. I'm not very religious, but through some of the work in terms of the divine feminine, in terms of womb wisdom, I came across a lot of information having to do with Mary Magdalene. And Danny and I have kind of since then picked up a couple of books and done a little bit of research. So we're not 100% experts, but we've been kind of diving into the history of Mary Magdalene. And it was kind of exciting for us to have it come full circle where now we were at the state of the Feast of Mary Magdalene. And as we were discussing what it means, we came up with a bunch of stuff that we thought might be beneficial to share.
We realized that there were some connections to shame that we can feel, just in everyday life. People cast judgments on us, and sometimes we judge ourselves, and sometimes we internalize those judgments. We believe the things that people say about us and internalize them, feel shame about them. And then that shame causes us to create more defense mechanisms, which, as you know, if you watch this show, we talk a lot about how defense mechanisms cut us off from our emotions, our true emotions, and they also cut us off from being able to experience love, both in giving and receiving love in a deep and, let's say, a pure way, an unfiltered way, because that's ultimately the defense mechanisms tend to be filters that kind of, what's the word? that kind of block us from feeling love. I wanted to talk a little bit about Mary Magdalene herself, and really this is very metaphorical. So whether you believe she existed as a person or not, whether you're a Christian or not, as a metaphor, it still works. The lesson we can draw from her story still works. So I grew up born again Christian, and in my experience in the church, Mary Magdalene was not somebody that was talked about very often. She's kind of like, my kind of sense of her was that she was a prostitute and she was healed, she was forgiven by Jesus. And so because she was forgiven, like, she's okay, right? She's like, she's saved now and she's okay. And it doesn't matter that she was a sinner. She's been redeemed. But that's really just like a very small part of the story. There's a lot of controversy, first of all, about whether in fact she was a prostitute or not. And I honestly don't think it really matters whether she was a prostitute or not. I don't think that judging someone's sins or judging certain sins as worse than others, and I use the word sins in quotes as well, is really relevant, right? We are all worthy of God's love, no matter what sins we commit, right? So whether she was a prostitute or not is largely irrelevant. I think for many years, for thousands of years, the church tried to minimize her or discredit her in a way by calling her a prostitute. And I don't think she should be minimized, even if she was a prostitute. There's a lot of controversy about that because obviously, there's evidence both for and against. But what cannot be denied is that she was sent into exile. The organized church that kind of merged with Rome hunted down Gnostic Christians, and it continued well into, like the Crusades and all of that. Basically, the enemies of the church. If you were not going along with the official church doctrine, you were considered a heretic and literally hunted down and killed. And so Magdalene was sent into exile because she was teaching what, if you read the Magdalene Gospel, she was teaching something that was, according to her and according to other Gnostic Gospels, what Christ was really teaching. And then the Gnostic view is that the church kind of changed and added in the patriarchal kind of aspects of, everything having to go through a very specific lens of the Catholic Church doctrine. And if you weren't inside that doctrine, or it wasn't called the Catholic Church then, but what became Orthodox Christianity, if you weren't going through that Orthodox lens, then you were going to hell, or you were not, you didn't have salvation. And Magdalene taught something very different from that. She taught that God is love, right? And she was teaching that love is the highest value. And basically she was teaching Christ's pure, the Beatitudes, his pure message, without all the added stuff that some of the other apostles added in. And there was even a lot of discord between the apostles because, coming from a Jewish background at the time, women were kind of meant to be silent, and Paul expresses that in some of his letters to the church. Maybe I'm going off on a little bit on a tangent here.
I think so.
Sorry. So I mean, if that creates a little bit of context, Magdalene kind of was exiled and she went into hiding. But even in that, she was creating spiritual community. She never stopped teaching Christ's message. She never allowed the shame of this judgment that the church cast on her as a heretic or as a prostitute to stop her from delivering the message of love. And I think that's probably the most important point that I was trying to get to. But, if you watch the show, I get long-winded. And so now, even today, she's still rejected by the church. Even today, we still do not talk about her. Aside from the Pope in 2016 kind of giving this official declaration that she's no longer considered a prostitute and she was one of the greatest apostles, and now they instituted the feast in her name. It hasn't filtered down into the church, really, at least not in my experience. It doesn't seem to be, although there are a lot more books now coming out about her gospel, about her message. And it seems like she finally is starting to get some of that recognition that I think she deserves. Even if you just look at it from a biblical perspective, she was the first one to see the resurrected Christ. So she's important. Like, if Christ appears to her first, then clearly she was someone important to Christ. She wasn't just a groupie that followed him around and was kind of like listening to his messages. She was one of the apostles. She was one of the disciples for sure. And, there's also a lot of conjecture or rumors or theories about them being partners. And some Christians are offended by that idea. I'm not offended by the idea of Christ being married, or, I don't know if they had kids together. There are some people that believe that the Holy Grail is his bloodline and all that. And I don't know how much of that I really believe, but I'm certainly not offended by the idea that someone would be less spiritual or less holy because they were married. I don't think that makes any sense. And I think especially with us trying to, follow a spiritual path while being in a romantic relationship, it makes sense to me that if Christ is going to redeem the world, right? Like within the mythos of Christianity, whether you believe it or not, if Christ is going to redeem the world, it would make sense that he would experience things like normal things that people experience, like a romantic relationship or even a marriage. So I don't know what the argument is really, why people would think, other than to say that, well, if Christ is holy, why would he choose a prostitute to be with? Well, to me, if anything, that's the ultimate sign of forgiveness, right? If you look at it that way, that she was a prostitute, that he forgave her of her sins and redeemed her, then
it's a true sign of unconditional love.
Yeah.
This idea, I mean, it's very easy to love someone who you agree with 100%, who has the same views as you, who perhaps is acceptable to you and your judgments. But it's a lot harder and a lot more work to love someone despite their our differences, despite the things that you don't necessarily like about them, or the things that you would at some point or another judge about them.
It would be very easy to love someone who's perfect, right? They're never going to offend you. They're never going to do anything wrong to you. If they're perfect, it'd be very easy to love them, right? So there's no challenge there. It doesn't require that like depth of love and depth of work. And we really have experienced that in our relationship, where at times it has been very hard for us to love each other because of because of our traumas, and causing those, like we said, the shame that causes defense mechanisms that make it hard, right? So one of the things that I kind of grew up with, again, growing up in the church, and I've always been kind of like a free thinker and a little bit rebellious. And so in a sense, I was not very easy to love. I identify a lot with Magdalene because I was very sinful, right? Or am very sinful, whatever, by Christian standards. And I grew up and I say that because from a Christian perspective, we're all sinful. And I'm trying to I don't want to make it like it's too religious, because I want to keep it like more in a metaphorical sense, right? But I grew up in a relationship with my childhood sweetheart, and her parents didn't approve of me. I wasn't holy enough for them. I wasn't smart enough for them. Even my own mother kind of took that attitude that my first wife was holier than me, and that I had to work hard to be a good Christian so that I could deserve her, because I didn't. And I internalized a lot of that. Here I am, a teenager, and I'm being told by not only that, but also the church I went to ended up throwing me out. I was excommunicated from the church for not even doing anything sinful, for holding prayer meetings that they didn't approve of. Because again, I'm a little bit rebellious. They didn't like I guess they saw it as more of a liberal doctrine, right? And they didn't like that. And so they told me I would have to stop having, prayer meetings, or else I had to leave. Anyway, so I was rejected by the church. I was rejected by my first wife's family. And I was even to some degree rejected by my mother. And I was rejected by my first wife in a sense, because she kept me a secret from her parents because they didn't approve of me. We dated in secret for like 5 years. And so I was kind of kept like a mistress, almost the way the church has kept Mary Magdalene hidden. She's like the shameful secret we don't want to talk about. We don't want to talk about the fact that, one of the greatest disciples was a prostitute, or could have been. We don't want to talk about the fact that one of the greatest disciples, or that the fact that Jesus might have been married to someone who was so sinful. We don't want to talk about that. We got to sweep that under the rug. We got to ignore that. So I kind of identify with Magdalene in that way. And I internalized a lot of that stuff. And I did have a lot of feelings of shame and unworthiness. And over the years, I ended up being married for about 15 years. Over the years of that shame started to turn to anger. As I started to realize my own value, and realized that people were treating me like I had no value for all that time, I started to get angry. So instead of forgiving them for how they treated me, I resented them. My wife, her parents, and even my own mother. I developed a deep resentment of them. And so what happened was I carry that into my relationship with Vanessa, where I had these deep-seated feelings of unworthiness that were kind of programmed into me since I was a kid. And then I was rebelling against that feeling. This is all kind of happening internally, right? I'm rebelling against that feeling of unworthiness, and it turns into kind of like this like egotistical bravado, right? So now Vanessa, if I'm engaging in some kind of behavior that hurts her, if I say something that hurts her, and she expresses that to me, it feels like an attack. It makes me feel like, oh, you're saying I'm not worthy the way my mom and all these people said I was not worthy as a kid. It triggers that wound. And now I throw up defense mechanisms and we argue it, and it just turns into an argument, and that just perpetuates that anger, and that those negative emotions just build up.
Yeah.
And feel free to jump in at any time and interrupt me. I don't want to take up the whole stream. I feel like in a way this is kind of like last week where I was kind of purging some stuff out, like I'm like expressing it, and
perfectly fine. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? If there's a lot of shame and it's unprocessed shame, what ends up happening is we develop defense mechanisms. I don't want to feel this shame. I don't want to feel these uncomfortable feelings. I'm going to push them. I'm going to bury them. I'm going to ignore them. But when somebody says something that triggers that shame, you immediately jump out, and it's all that energy that's been built up from everything that you've been suppressing for so long. And then you're defensive, you need to get aggressive in order to defend yourself, and it just snowballs into something much bigger when really, I could be saying, hey, you forgot to throw the garbage out,
Yeah, and a lot of times it was over something silly like that. Not washing the dishes or something silly. But like your ego can't tell the difference between, your subconscious mind doesn't really see the way your conscious mind does. So as a matter of fact, in one of the books that we talk about all the time, Getting the Love You Want, they talk about the reptilian brain, the kind of base of your subconscious brain where it only sees in archetypes. And so it sees people that you want to be nurtured by, like parental figures. It sees people you want to nurture, your children. It sees your love, like who you want to be a lover of. There were 5. I don't remember the others. And then it sees threats. So people that are a threat to you that either you should attack or run from. So your subconscious mind doesn't know the difference. So when she would criticize me, I felt like I was attacked, and now my ego's like, someone's trying to attack us. What should we do? Should we run or should we attack? And my go-to generally tended to be to attack back, to get louder, to scream, and to fight rather than run away. So that's kind of how that drama would play out over and over again. And I want to say for the record that I have forgiven my ex-wife. I've forgiven her family. I've forgiven my mother, because I understand now that they had their own traumas. They had their own insecurities and things that they were going through that made them feel the need to judge me and project those judgments onto me. So I understand that now, and I can be in forgiveness, and I can have unconditional love for them as, fellow human beings and people that played an important role in my life. It wasn't all bad. It wasn't that was the only thing. They loved me in other ways as well. That was just a judgment that really hurt me. And so I can, and I'm not saying that I always feel it. There are moments when I don't feel like I've forgiven them, like that anger can come back up again. But now I can release it. I don't have to delve into or dwell on it and allow that that feeling of feeling like I was judged to control my behaviors. My subconscious brain doesn't have to react so strongly anymore. As you heal those wounds, you forgive people and let those things go. You don't have that knee-jerk reaction anymore. You still may have the feeling, but you can just say, oh yeah, I remember that. I had that feeling again, but it's okay. We've forgiven them. We understand why they did those things to us, and we can let that go.
Yep. And it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. You can go through the process of forgiving, and like Danny said, then still have those moments where you feel that anger or that resentment, and then it's not as strong anymore. It just comes in slower waves, lower waves, easier waves to handle, until eventually it's just like a memory of a feeling that you had. For me, a lot of the shame that I've carried over the years has been sometimes about our own relationship. We've spoken about this before. Danny and I have kind of gone through hell in our relationship. Just this past week, I was talking to a friend and I was saying, it's funny, it's almost like Danny and I came together and said, what's the worst thing we can possibly do to each other? And let's do all of that first. And then it'll be smooth sailing from there on. And it kind of is what we did. We
not consciously,
not consciously, obviously. We just made a ton of mistakes in the beginning of our relationship. Danny had his defense mechanisms. I had my own defense mechanisms. I also had feelings of unworthiness that are also just, I think, experiences that we have. We misinterpret things. I was misinterpreting things that my parents said to me. Maybe they just didn't know how to express certain forms of encouragement. Their way of encouraging was being kind of demanding and saying, we expect the best from you. We want the best from you. If it's not the best, you did something wrong. And so there were many times where I struggled with feelings of unworthiness. And Danny and I was married before. I got separated, and kind of having that feeling of, oh my God, I have a failed marriage. That's terrible. I disappointed my family. I disappointed my friends. I carried those feelings of shame for some time. Getting into a relationship with Danny and kind of going through some of the worst things we could ever put each other through in a relationship. I got into drinking. I was drinking heavily. We were fighting, yelling at each other. There were times where we would be out at a bar, hanging out, having a great time, and it would somehow turn into this huge fight where we'd be screaming at each other on the street. And it was the next morning I would wake up with these heavy, heavy feelings of shame of like, oh my God, what did I do last night? If we fought in front of friends, what are our friends going to think? How embarrassing. They're going to think I'm an idiot for staying with this guy after I've said all this shit about him. It was like horrible. And the really interesting thing is that a few weeks ago, we live in Brooklyn, and there was somebody out on the street in the middle of the night. I guess they had a party. It was a Saturday night, and they were going home, and it was two couples, and one of the women was really drunk, and she was fighting with her partner, yelling at him. She was really drunk and yelling, you don't love me, you treat me like crap, you're this, you're that. And the friends kind of intervened, and one took one to the side and one took the other, and I guess they were trying to talk them down and convince her to get into the car. The husband's like, she's just talking nonsense, she's drunk, she's crazy. And the woman's like, I don't want to go home with you, I hate you. And I could feel the distress and the pain in her voice, and it triggered memories of the fights we used to have, of me being in so much pain, of what we were going through, and letting it all just build up to a point where I would explode when I was drinking. And I could feel the shame too. And the first thing I thought is, when she wakes up tomorrow, she's going to be so embarrassed and so ashamed. It's going to be so painful to realize everything that happened the night before. And who knows, maybe they will break up. Maybe it'll be a point where she says, I really feel this way, I'm done with this guy. Or maybe she's going to say, oh my God, I can't believe I did that in front of my friends, and now I'm going to stay with this guy because I love him. We're just going through perhaps a rough patch, a difficult situation, and I am stuck with the fact that I screamed at him on the street while I was drunk. And for years, I held on to the shame of those drinking days. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to talk about it. I was super embarrassed, and I was like, I have to become a better person. I can't be that way. And in trying to do that, I was really shaming those parts of myself. By saying, I want to be better than that. I don't want to be that. That's disgusting. That's horrible. I was casting shame upon this part of myself that was really wounded and was doing the best that I could at the time with all of the emotions I was feeling. And so as we were talking about Mary Magdalene and the shame and kind of being hidden, I was thinking, how many times do we judge ourselves and shame ourselves for past actions, for mistakes that we made? And we think we should have known better. We should have done better. You know, there have been moments where we talk about our relationship and Danny said, I wish we hadn't gone through all the trauma. If we hadn't experienced all of that trauma, our relationship would just be fun and beautiful and we wouldn't have to worry about any of that. But the truth of the matter is, without all of those traumas, without all of those experiences, we wouldn't have gotten to the depth of love that we feel now. We had to go through those traumas to break apart some of those, to let go of some of those past experiences, of those past hurts, and to really love ourselves for the defense mechanisms that we had at the time, recognizing they were just defense mechanisms. If I got drunk and acted out, it was a defense mechanism. It wasn't because I was just a horrible person. We all have the capacity to do bad things. We have the capacity to hurt others, and we don't necessarily do it consciously. I don't think most of us wake up in the morning and say, how am I going to be a jerk today? How am I going to hurt my partner today? It's not like that. I mean, it's a matter of us waking up and having all of these pains and sadness and traumas that we are carrying, and we feel we're the only ones carrying it. And so we have to keep it together. We have to be perfect. We can't make any mistakes. And then you make a mistake and it's like the whole world falls apart. I mean, even as children, sometimes, depending on how we're raised, we tend to have that mentality. You know, sometimes a child messes up a drawing and they're like, oh, I ruined it and it's the end of the world. And if you're not there in that moment to tell a child, it's okay, we can just start over, we can erase it, we can use this mistake and build something different on it. We can grow up with this idea that we're imperfect and that it's wrong to be imperfect and that it makes us unworthy. And so having these conversations, I think I kind of started to integrate the fact that I can love all parts of myself, even the parts that are ugly or the parts that are not in perfection or that don't look right or that are, you know, traumatic at times. It's okay. That's part of the experience we're having right now. As a human being, we are here to experience all things, all emotions. And if Danny and I hadn't created all of this chaos in our relationship, we wouldn't have uncovered all of the traumas that were lurking underneath the surface. And, you know, we're working together to heal those things. And it's such a beautiful experience now. The other day I was driving and it was pouring and I was listening to music and Bob Marley came on, and I just had this overwhelming feeling of like listening to the words of his music and hearing him talk about giving thanks and praise to the Lord and oneness and all of these things. And I was just so overwhelmed by love at the idea that we get to live this experience. We get to have this experience where we feel pain, we feel anger, we feel suffering, and we feel love at the same time. And it's all part of this greater picture. And I just felt so grateful for all of my experiences. I felt grateful for every disappointment, for every stumble, for every fall, for every single part of my life that has brought me to this point. Where Danny and I talk about where we live in a space now of infinite love. And I don't think we've even fully tapped into the complete depth of that, but we're on the way. And as we've gone through all of these things, it just seems to get stronger and stronger and easier to love each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I struggle with, she mentioned before that I've said things like, I wish we didn't go through all that stuff, because I still struggle with some of the feelings of shame over some of those behaviors that we both engaged in. But Kel Hawk is saying it perfectly. How else can we experience forgiveness? And from both sides, the beauty of me forgiving her and the beauty of me receiving forgiveness from her for the things that we've done. We wouldn't be able to experience that if we never had any of those issues. me and my ex-wife, during our marriage, we didn't, we avoided conflict. I mean, she avoided conflict. I tried to engage in it, but we kind of ignored a lot of our issues. And honestly, we had a very easy relationship. It was very peaceful. There wasn't a lot of fighting. We just but we were more like friends or roommates than anything else. There wasn't that depth of like passion and love because we weren't allowing ourselves to delve deep. And I don't blame either one of us now. We just weren't ready. We weren't in a place that we could face those things yet. And I do appreciate the fact that we kind of had to go through hell to get to be in a place where we had no other choice, really.
Yeah.
Right? Where it was like either that or we're going to just have to walk away from each other. And luckily, the love bond was strong enough that we refused to walk away. We changed from avoiding those dark issues, avoiding the shame, to facing it head on. And we both had to be willing to do that internally with ourselves, face our own shame, and then be willing to face each other's shame. So I am grateful for that we went through all those things and that all those trials taught us to face our own shame and forgive each other for each other's shame.
Yeah. And I think like even the other day that I was listening to this woman crying outside in her drunkenness, I it was in the middle of the night. So I kind of like woke up and was listening to her and I was feeling the emotions of my own experiences. And I started praying for her and kind of just sending her love because I knew she was hurting in that moment. And while I was doing that, I realized it was also like sending past Vanessa that love too, that those moments where I was feeling so much shame and sadness and pain, I could send love to those parts of myself. And sometimes we don't realize we can do that.
Or that it's important to forgive yourself.
Exactly. Because there was a long time where there was a period where I couldn't talk about those moments. It was embarrassing to me. Even doing this live stream, there have been things that I've been afraid to say, or it's like we're putting our relationship out there. We're talking about the ugly parts of our relationship. But the truth is, we all experience it. And it's so sad that there are moments where we feel we can't share that because we have to share the picture perfect parts, the parts where everything's easy, the parts where things are just, Instagrammable.
Selfie.
But we don't really talk about the moments that we're struggling, and we all struggle. And so what happens is when we come across an experience that seems difficult or seems ugly or hurtful, we're embarrassed to talk about it. We're embarrassed that we're doing something wrong. We're failing if we're having arguments, if we're having problems in our relationship. And it's just so important to be open about it, to talk to others about it, because we all have those experiences. I don't think that anybody really has a relationship where everything is absolutely perfect. My parents are going to be married for 50 years at the end of this year. And they've been together for so long. They have 3 kids, they have grandkids, and they are completely in love. My parents send love letters to each other. They hold hands when they're walking down the street. They are very romantic with each other, but they still have struggles. There are moments when there are arguments, there are disagreements, and they're still struggling to figure out how to deal with certain things. And it's a lifelong process. I think when you find the right person, that you're both willing to put in the work for it, that you're both willing to love each other and accept each other as you are, then that's where the magic happens. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be perfect. It just means that
or easy.
It's really, really hard.
It's hard as fuck. I want to address this comment. Equalizing Force said he had a girlfriend who always played the victim card and that she was manipulative, so they broke up. It's not always straightforward. Yes, it is not always straightforward. It is chaos, and it is painful, and it is hard and angry and dirty. We've been through it. I guess the thing that I would say to you, Equalizing Force, is that, and this is not to say that you should have stayed with her. I don't know what the situation is, but even if even if you remain broken up and you just feel like I'm not meant to be in a relationship with this person, try to understand that her being manipulative or her playing the victim all the time comes from the fact that she has been traumatized. She has past hurts. And that's what makes her kind of put up those defense mechanisms. Playing the victim card and being manipulative, they're defense mechanisms. It's people trying to control their reality to hurt less, ultimately. And if you really dig deeper than that, it's really just about wanting to be loved. And it's a crazy way the ego does it. It's backwards. It doesn't make sense. And it's almost impossible when you're in it, when you're in that moment, to recognize, oh wait, this is my ego like trying to make me feel love, but at the same time it's like causing all these problems, you know. And it's just a weird thing, that it's just a backwards way that the ego, it's literally like we're still children and just trying to do anything we can. We're flailing, we're throwing temper tantrums, trying to just make connections to other people to feel loved, because love makes us feel safe. Ultimately, that's all it is. So if you can forgive her for manipulating you, because you understand that she was really, in some way, in some warped defense mechanism way, she was trying to feel loved, that can certainly help forgive and let go of a lot of that negative emotion. Like I said, even if you guys never get back together or it's just not meant to be, that's fine. But you don't want to carry around unforgiveness for other people, because that's what I did for a long time. I carried around that unforgiveness of those people in my life making me feel unworthy. But at the same time, because I was like holding on to that idea of unworthiness, it's like, it's hard to explain. It's like a paradox of, I'm mad at them for making me feel unworthy, but at the same time, I'm believing them that I'm unworthy. Because if I didn't believe them, if I knew I'm worthy, then them telling me I'm unworthy wouldn't affect me, right? Like, if I have that confidence, somebody can insult you and say you're not worthy, but if you really truly have the confidence inside that you are, you can just feel compassion for them and like, oh, you're trying to make me feel unworthy because you feel unworthy about yourself. You're projecting that onto me, and I can feel bad for you. I can feel compassion because I know what that feels like, that you feel unworthy, and I don't want you to feel that way. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like, feel free to comment if you agree, disagree.
And I also think that when you hold on to these feelings, you're carrying your past relationships into new relationships.
Yeah.
And a lot of us do that. We have these experiences in our previous relationships, and when we don't release them, forgive them, let go, we carry them, and it's basically like we're in a relationship with all of our previous relationships.
Yeah.
And you know, that was a thing that affected our relationship for a long time, because Danny was reacting to his ex-wife whenever I would talk to him,
or my mother,
or his mother.
Yeah.
And it was a really difficult to navigate, because half the time I had no idea what was really happening. I was like, this seems
she
like
just says something very simple and it triggers me, like, because it's something my mom used to say, and I get angry, and she's like, what are you getting so angry about? Right.
And when you're in a relationship, you're going to trigger some of your strongest childhood wounds, especially in a relationship. The other night we were having dinner with a friend, and I made a joke, and I was in a way making fun of Danny, but in a joking way. It wasn't like, the idea is that Danny doesn't always get excited about things that happen to him. He's very like muted about it. So, and I don't know if it's at times because there's insecurity about, like, when we're excited and celebrating him and saying, wow, I can't believe you did that, he's just like, yeah.
Sometimes I still have those feelings of being unworthy. So I almost feel like when she's praising me, like, I don't really deserve that praise. And so it makes me feel uncomfortable. And so, like, I don't really like, I'm like, oh, thanks. Yeah.
And so,
but I'm like, I don't think, you just don't know that I'm unworthy. I still have some of that subconscious. I'm still working through that and working to let that go. like she said, it's like a lifetime process.
Yeah. And so our friend was telling us, like, I can't believe he just sits there like nothing, like, oh, it's no big deal. Nothing major happened. And, you know, we were kind of laughing about it. And the waitress came over and asked him how his dinner was, because he had ordered a special. And he was like, yeah, it was good. He was like she was like, oh, okay. She seemed like she was looking for more, like for him to say, yeah, it was really amazing. I loved it. And he was just like, yeah, it was good. And when the waitress walked away, I said I should have told her he doesn't really get excited about anything, so he's not going to get excited about dinner. And it triggered him. You know, it was that feeling of me saying, you're not doing good enough. You're not worthy of whatever it is that we're doing in this moment. And so he snapped at me. And he was like, just stop. And it was the energy of his voice, the way he looked at me when he said it. And I immediately was triggered by my own childhood traumas. And I was sitting there at the table and all of a sudden feeling him telling me to just stop. And my mind immediately went to, you can never joke anymore. You're never going to say anything again. Just, you know, stick to the facts. Don't make jokes about him. He's going to take it personally. If he wants to joke around and laugh, just laugh along with him, but don't make jokes because he can't handle it. And so I'm sitting there, and after I said all these things to myself in my head, I'm like, wow, that was really dramatic and completely unnecessary. What kind of defense mechanism is that? And then I start thinking about it. Like, why would I react that way? Is it really necessary for me to all of a sudden say, I'm never going to joke again with him? And I realized this is actually a theme in my life, because as a child in a very conservative home where, you know, children aren't necessarily included in all of the conversations, there were times in my childhood when I said things and I was told, enough with the joking, enough with these comments. We're having a conversation, stay out of it. And my immediate defense mechanism was like, I'm never going to say anything again. I'm just going to shut up. I'm not going to tell them what I think because they're going to tell me I'm wrong, or to just be quiet. And I recognized that was my own childhood trauma coming up and feeling that shame of, oh no, I said something inappropriate. I said something wrong and I should be ashamed of myself and I should just be quiet. And again, there was that shame being triggered in the moment he said, just stop, where I was like, oh, gotta shut down and never say anything again. And it's insane how like easily these defense mechanisms slip in, because if I wasn't paying enough attention in that moment, I would have gone with it. And I would have stayed with that for days or even weeks and thought, well, I'm just not going to joke anymore. I'm just going to, keep my mouth shut and only respond when he says something to me, and that's it. And it's wild. And like Danny says,
but that's a filter.
You create, exactly, it's a filter, and then you create these defense mechanisms because you want to be loved, but at the same time, it's impossible for you to receive the love when you have this defense mechanism up. It's
right.
The ego is a tricky thing.
If you would have given into that, you would have limited our communication. And then that limits the expression and the receiving of love.
Yeah.
Yeah. And while we're discussing this, I'm realizing that when she was like, oh, Danny doesn't really get excited about anything, that felt to me like a criticism. Again, you're not good enough. Your behaviors aren't right. There's something wrong with you, right? Because you don't get excited. And so I took it as a criticism. And I felt upset about it because I was like, yeah, I'm trying to work through this. I'm trying to be more free so I can be more free to express excitement and to not have those feelings of shame, of feeling like when you compliment me, I don't deserve it. It doesn't help to be reminded like, oh yeah, I forgot you can't experience excitement, right? It makes me feel like it's like a reminder that, yeah, you still have that shame. And so I can recognize that and realize, okay, so I still have some of these feelings of shame that I still need to work through. That's why I was triggered by what she said and I snapped at her that way. And so now, hopefully next time it happens, before I snap back, I can say, okay, this is triggering that feeling of shame. You don't have to respond nasty. She's not trying to poke you. She's just, she's trying to make a joke about it, make it more light and funny, right? She's trying to take away some of the power of that. So that it's not so serious, that it's more of, more joking. Like that was her intention. And I know that's what her intention was. So now next time we have this trigger, hopefully the reaction won't be as strong on both of our parts, right? And then the more times we can practice that, the more time that trigger comes up and we practice not reacting, but just thinking about it and then responding thoughtfully, consciously, the less painful and the less triggering it will be, until eventually it won't be. So eventually it'll just be a memory, like Vanessa said before, of, oh, do you remember when you used to joke with me and I used to get so upset because it was making me feel shame, or because it reminded me of the shame that I was feeling? So,
and the interesting thing is then we can talk about it now. We are in a place where we can talk about it, because later that evening we came home and, you know, we had our friend was staying with us, so we were hanging out and chatting. And then before we went to bed, Danny and I started, you know, I brought it up and I said, you know, I've been thinking about this because I recognized the reaction that I had. And I realized how that's tied to like this childhood trauma that I have of like having to stay quiet. I have a tendency to just want to stay in the background and be quiet and not speak up. And Danny's always urging me, like, just say what, you know, say it, be open, express yourself. And I have a really hard time with that. And I know that that comes from, you know, the childhood experience of being told to just be quiet. And, for us to kind of have this conversation where we were expressing I was expressing my defense mechanism, and it also gave him the permission or the feeling, the comfort of being able to express what he was feeling. I was feeling shame in that moment. I was feeling like you were telling me I wasn't good enough. And you know, we were able then to have this conversation. Oh, we're triggering each other's childhood wounds. We're really like, this is what happens in every relationship. As we mentioned before in the book, Getting the Love You Want, there's the therapist talks about the fact that we choose our partners because they do remind us of our parents, and not in a conscious way. Sometimes it's just a small little gesture that they can make that reminds us of an experience we had in our childhood. And so we feel like, oh, this person feels familiar. This person feels like home. And so you get into this relationship with the person. And really what your subconscious is trying to do is recreate your childhood trauma so that they can be repaired, so that your partner will respond differently and will heal that part of your childhood where you didn't get the response that you were expecting. And this is why we trigger each other so much. There are many times that Danny has said things to me that remind me of something that my parents said to me when I was younger, and I react to that. You know, we had an experience a while back where he said something, but did you really try? And I was furious. I exploded. I mean, it got to the point where I was actually crying, and it wasn't even that big of a deal, but I recognized it like, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 minutes later, where I was like, wow, this is really from my childhood of having my parents constantly say, well, did you really try? If I didn't get like 100 on a test, well, did you really study? If you had really studied, you would have gotten 100. If you had really done this, you would have done better. And so to kind of have him say like, well, did you really try though? It like set me off completely. But we are in a place where we are a little bit more aware of our reactions and why we have those reactions. And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of practice. Danny and I have been doing this for years now, and it gets easier is all I can say. There's light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
We are happier now than we have ever been. Like, right, we're going through our honeymoon phase now, after being together for so many years, where like we got through all the trauma, and now we are just like, we're kids now. It's crazy. Like, we're just constantly loving on each other, joking, fooling around, and like, we're so playful and so much more free and so much more able to like just love each other purely and just without any of those feelings, like where they're not as in the forefront. Obviously, like there's still kind of some subconscious stuff that still needs to be rooted out, always will. But we're at a place now where we are really happy together. And life is so good. life is really good when you can have like a harmonious relationship like that.
And, you know, right now that you're saying that, it reminded me of a while back I was reading in one of the books about Mary Magdalene. Somebody was talking about Jesus saying that heaven would be for the children, something like that, something along those lines.
Yeah, it requires the faith of a child and stuff like that.
Yeah, and
like an innocent, pure faith.
Yeah, and I think that that's what that is, right? I mean, we talk about how we're in this place of heaven right now because of our relationship, and really it is undoing all of these traumas that we've experienced in our lives up until now to get to a point of purity, right? Purity isn't about being perfect. It's about being free. It's about expressing yourself genuinely. It is about being genuine and vulnerable, because that's what children are.
Mm-hmm.
Children are pure because they'll say whatever comes to their mind. They'll express their emotions. You know, they'll say anything. You know, my birthday was on Friday, and yesterday I was at my sister's house, and one of my nieces comes up to me. She was like, "Happy birthday! You're getting so old." And I started laughing. It was funny just because I can feel that it's not coming from a place of judgment. It's just an observation. To her, I'm much older.
She just has this like really innocent spirit of like, she just says things and she doesn't even understand like how it could be taken as an insult, or what'd she say about hopefully you won't get too many wrinkles or something like that.
Hopefully you won't get too many wrinkles.
And like, it's like she means it from a really genuine place, but you know, but that's what it is. It's like that innocence sometimes of children where they don't even understand like what they're saying.
Yeah, but it's honest.
Or maybe the real thing is that adults who have so much trauma and so many judgments and so used to judging and being judged, that we assign those meanings to things. So kids will just say something matter of fact, like, "Wow, yeah, you're getting old. You are. You had another birthday. Yeah. You're older," right? But then we assign that judgment to it. "Oh my God, I'm getting old. I'm getting wrinkly. I'm getting ugly. I'm losing my hair. I don't look as good as I did when I was." Like, we add all that stuff on that kids don't add.
Yeah, and I think that that's where the innocence comes in, right? Just that's what the purity is, of being able to observe things without judgments. And sometimes as adults, or oftentimes as adults, when children say things very matter of fact, we take that offensively because we're adding the judgment part to it. And as we've kind of come through to this place of where we've been healing all of our past traumas, we have started releasing the judgment on some of the things that we've experienced. Yeah, I don't judge those drunken nights anymore because I know I was coming from a place of pain and that I needed to go through that in order to finally get to a place where we could work through the issues that were causing all of that pain. There were so many years where we were just suppressing some of those feelings. I was suppressing a lot of things. I was like, I'm not going to say anything. You know, I had gotten divorced. And so I thought like, I shouldn't rock the boat. I shouldn't say anything. But then I would drink and all of that would come out. And it had to lead to so many fights of so many disasters that we created until eventually it was like, okay, this is not going to work. We need to deal with the issues so that I don't have to react this way every time I drink. And now I can go out and have a drink and it doesn't turn into a fight. It doesn't turn into us being at each other's throat. And to be honest, we don't really even drink that much anymore because we don't have the desire to cover up any of the emotions. We don't have this desire to numb out any of the emotions. The majority of our emotions are joy right now. And why would we want to cover that up at all?
Yeah.
So good job.
Nice job, baby. It really is like so freeing to let go of some of that stuff, and like we're just really enjoying ourselves in this relationship now. Yeah.
And I mean, I think one of the things that I've been reflecting upon with this whole pandemic is that so many people have kind of just had a chance to slow down and to realize that, you know, this running around and the rat race and trying to like get as much done as possible is really what's holding us back from enjoying ourselves. I mean, we're here to enjoy ourselves, to enjoy our lives, to spend time with our children, with our families, with people that make us happy, with, you know, we came to have this experience. And for me, it's been an eye-opener. I've come to appreciate so many more things in my life. Like I was saying the other day, listening to Bob Marley, I just had this feeling of appreciation for every single moment of my life. I mean, this guy cut me off on his bike and I honked at him and, you know, I honked and then I laughed because I was like, oh my God, this was just another experience, right? Like somebody said before, how do you experience forgiveness if somebody doesn't actually do something to you that creates an opportunity for forgiveness? And so there's this divine perfection in all of it, and all of the good and the bad. And once you realize that there is this perfection in all of it, then there is no judgment of any of those experiences, because it's all either meant to teach you something, it's meant to direct you in a certain way, it's meant to create different opportunities. So it is all perfect, and therefore you can't judge it as bad.
Just think about this for a minute, and maybe you could see why I appreciate this woman so much. She can find joy in a bicycle cutting her off. She can have a reaction, honk the horn, and then be like, "Oh, I forgive you for cutting me off." You know, like finding joy in the experience that shame that still resides in there that I need to continually work on to free myself. But I've done so much work, because I'm so much more free, and the anger, I used to be so angry, you know, being an activist, fighting against the New World Order and all these things. I was just angry all the time. And now I realize I can be free even with the New World Order, you know, collapsing freedom around us, right? We can still live free, because if we're free in our hearts and our minds, we're free from mental slavery, then you can feel free, right? So that's why you could be a prisoner of the New World Order and still feel that joy of, oh wow, I'm free because they can lock up my body, they can kill my body, but they can't destroy my spirit.
Absolutely.
Wow.
But it's all a work in progress.
Yeah. I think somebody big said that, somebody famous, right? I just don't remember who. I
think Nelson Mandela, when he was released from prison, said something like that. If he had to let go and forgive, otherwise, once he left prison, he would have still been a prisoner. Right. You're a prisoner to your anger at the people that imprisoned you. Right. Yes. So if we stay angry at Bill Gates for trying to force microchip vaccinations on us, you're imprisoning yourself before the vaccinations even exist. Yeah, exactly. You're imprisoning yourself if you stay angry at Trump for all the mayhem he's inflicting on us, or Obama, or whoever. You're a prisoner to that anger, and that anger causes you to feel less love. And yeah, exactly. The vibes we sow are the vibes we reap. Absolutely. So if you're vibing in anger against the New World Order or whatever you want to fight against, so that you feel like you can have your freedom in a physical sense, you're a prisoner to that vibe, and you're going to reap back that. And that's what was happening to me for a long time. And it's only been the last couple of years that I've been able to slowly start letting go of that anger and just operating more on a vibe of love. Yep. And that's what we're here for. We're here to. That's what the Lovestream's about. Recover our sovereignty from our own minds, from the illusions we create. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So thank you so much for joining us. That was, I think, a good show. That's a good place to end it, I think. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all your wonderful comments. And, leave us more comments, suggestions on topics we can cover. And Danny's going to talk a little bit about our social media accounts. Yes, we're on all the major social medias, and I say this every week. The big social media companies are openly saying they're going to censor
information that is considered fake news, and we all know that they like to censor stuff that's actually truth. But we are on all those platforms. But because of that, I like to promote Minds.com and Float because these are two social media platforms that don't censor, first of all, and they don't sell your information. They respect your privacy, so they don't sell your information the way Facebook and the other big media does. They don't do the data mining. These are blockchain-based social media platforms. So check them out if you haven't already. They're pretty cool, and they have a pretty similar feel to Facebook in terms of like the way the apps are set up. So you don't have to give up a lot of that functionality for the privacy. That's one of the things that I tend to be frustrated by, is like having to give up technological functionality to protect privacy, or to be on a platform that is more along with my values. So check them out. Give us a follow. Retweet us, share this video if you think some of your friends might, if you got any value from it and you think some of your friends might, please share the video and help us spread the love.
Yes. Thank you so much, and have an amazing Sunday.
Take care.